Attachment often begins quietly, almost invisibly. It starts as a feeling of closeness, a desire to bond, to understand, to feel seen. But over time, attachment can become something heavier. It can wrap itself around the mind like a vine, pulling thought and perception into tangled directions. When you become attached to a person, an outcome, or an idea of how things should unfold, your inner vision begins to distort. You start interpreting events not as they are, but as you fear or hope them to be. This is the blindness that attachment creates. It blinds you to truth, blinds you to yourself, blinds you to the movement of energy around you. When you attach emotionally, your focus narrows. Your awareness becomes locked onto one point: his words, his actions, his inconsistencies, his silence. You begin to read meaning into everything, even when nothing is there. You search for reassurance, validation, signs that the connection still holds. And in that constant searching, you lose sight of your own strength. You become so invested in holding on that you forget to examine what you are holding on to. You place your peace into someone else's hands and wonder why it no longer feels stable. Attachment convinces you that closeness comes from intensity, from emotional effort, from pouring yourself into someone so fully that they cannot overlook you. But this is the illusion. Attachment does not create closeness. It creates dependency. It creates fear. It creates emotional noise. And noise clouds clarity. Attachment makes you overlook behaviors that do not align with your values. It makes you justify actions that disturb your spirit. It silences your intuition because your desire to keep what you have becomes louder than your inner knowing. You become willing to shrink your boundaries just to avoid losing someone who may not even be meeting you where you stand. This is how attachment blinds you. It makes you see potential instead of reality, excuses instead of patterns, hope instead of truth. But clarity begins the moment you create inner distance. Detachment is not the absence of care, it is the presence of perspective. It is the ability to observe without collapsing emotionally. When you detach, you pull your energy back from the situation and return it to yourself. Your mind widens, your awareness expands. You begin to perceive things as they are, without the fog of expectation or longing. Detachment brings back your ability to choose instead of react. You start to watch his actions objectively, not with the hope that he will change, but with the understanding of what he is communicating through behavior. You see what you ignored when you were emotionally tied. You notice the imbalance between what you give and what you receive. You recognize inconsistencies, avoidances, hesitations, and the places where effort disappears. And instead of panicking or chasing, you simply acknowledge what is in front of you. Clarity comes when you stop arguing with reality. When you detach, you no longer force a story to fit your desires. You no longer try to fill in gaps that someone else refuses to bridge. You no longer invest emotional labor into convincing a person to value you. Instead, you begin to value your own inner state. You return to the foundation inside yourself that was always steady but had become overshadowed by attachment. Detachment also creates clarity about your own emotions. When you step back, you begin to understand what you truly feel, what is authentic and what is fear-driven. You realize how much of your attachment was rooted in anxiety, hope, or the desire for validation. You see how your identity was becoming intertwined with his behavior. And as that awareness grows, the emotional pressure begins to dissolve. You breathe differently, you think differently, you act differently. Not because you no longer care, but because you now see through the surface of things. Detachment allows you to return to the present moment. Attachment lives in the future, what he might do, what the relationship might become, how you hope things will unfold. Detachment lives in the now, what is happening, what is being shown, what energy is flowing toward you or away from you. In this grounded awareness, you stop projecting. You stop imagining. You stop creating stories around someone else's potential. You start responding to truth. And as clarity returns, something profound happens. Your emotional equilibrium resets. The intensity fades. The need for answers weakens. Your nervous system relaxes. You no longer wait for messages, validation, or reassurance to determine your worth. You no longer chase connection because you recognize that real connection does not require pursuit. It requires reciprocity. When you detach, you also become more connected to yourself. Your inner world opens. You start investing energy into your growth, your routines, your peace. You make decisions for yourself rather than decisions driven by fear of loss. You choose actions that honor your boundaries, You strengthen your sense of self, and as you grow more centered, you see relationships not through the lens of desire but through the lens of alignment. Clarity reveals what attachment tried to hide, and in that revelation, you discover the quiet truth that peace was never lost. It was simply waiting beneath the weight of emotional entanglement. Calmness is not just a state of mind, it is a form of silent communication, a presence that speaks even when no words are exchanged. When you cultivate calmness within yourself, it becomes something he cannot ignore. It reflects back to him everything he has been unable or unwilling to see. Your calm becomes a mirror, revealing truths that would remain hidden if you reacted emotionally or allowed chaos to shape your responses. In many relationships, emotional intensity becomes the dominant force. You may feel compelled to explain yourself, to defend your feelings, to fix misunderstandings, or to prove your value. The more you react, the more he becomes accustomed to the noise of your emotional expression. But when you grow calm, when you no longer rush to fill silence or heal every fracture, he begins to notice the space your stillness creates. In this space, he sees himself more clearly. Calmness removes the emotional fog. It removes the pressure he once felt from your expectations or fears. Instead of confronting him with arguments, tears, or anxious energy, your calmness places a quiet responsibility on him. He can no longer rely on your reactions to guide the direction of the connection. He can no longer hide behind your emotional responses. He must confront his own behavior without the distortion that emotional conflict can bring. When you remain calm, you allow him to feel the natural consequences of his choices. If he withdraws, you do not chase. If he becomes inconsistent, you do not overextend to bring back balance. If he creates confusion, you do not rush to seek clarity from him. You find it within yourself. This calmness forces him to see the space between you not as a battlefield, but as a reflection. He sees the difference between your centeredness and his own inner turbulence. Calm energy has a grounding effect. It slows down the emotional pace of interaction. Where there once was tension, there is now stillness. Where there once was reactivity, there is now deliberate presence. And in this environment, he begins to observe himself. Your calm asks silent questions. Why is he distant? Why does he hesitate? Why does he struggle to match your consistency? Why is he unable to offer what he expects in return? These questions are never spoken aloud, yet they echo inside him. Calmness has a way of exposing what noise once concealed. When you are no longer emotionally entangled in his actions, he must sit with the awareness of his own behavior. Your calm becomes a standard, one he feels either drawn to rise toward or confronted by. It becomes a quiet invitation for him to meet you differently. Your calm also changes the dynamic of power. Emotional reactivity can make you feel powerless because your inner state becomes dependent on his behavior. But when you regain calmness, you reclaim yourself. You show through your presence that you are not controlled by external chaos. You show that your emotions are not dictated by someone else's inconsistency. And in this reclaimed autonomy, he feels the shift. He senses that you no longer operate from fear of loss, but from a deeper place of self-alignment. This shift can be unsettling for him. He may have grown used to your emotional availability, your readiness to repair, your willingness to carry the emotional weight of the connection. But your calmness reveals that you are no longer operating from that place. You are no longer absorbing his energy, you are reflecting it. You are no longer reacting, you are observing. And this makes him aware of what he brings into the connection. Your calmness can highlight his instability. It can make him aware of the inconsistencies he once dismissed. It can show him how his actions create emotional ripples, not through your anger, but through your silence. Calmness allows him to witness the contrast between how you carry yourself and how he handles the connection. This contrast becomes a powerful mirror, not because you force it, but because it naturally emerges when you stop reacting and start embodying your own peace. Calmness is a form of strength that speaks softly yet profoundly. It communicates that you do not fear the outcome. It shows that you trust yourself more than you trust the temporary emotional currents of the moment. It reveals that you have learned to separate your sense of worth from his behavior. When you hold this calmness, you stop trying to influence him through emotion. Instead, you influence him through presence. Men are often more affected by emotional absence than emotional intensity. Calmness creates a type of absence, your absence from drama, from over-explaining, from emotional spirals. In that absence, he becomes aware of what he once took for granted. He notices the stability you brought. He notices the peace you cultivated. He notices the effort you held inside yourself even when he did not match it. Your calmness becomes the reflection he cannot avoid. And as he becomes aware, he begins to adjust, sometimes slowly, sometimes unexpectedly. He starts to reflect on how he shows up. He begins to see the imbalance that your calmness reveals. He may feel compelled to match your steadiness, to honor the space with more presence, to meet you with more intention. Because your calmness creates the conditions for transformation, not by force but by silent influence. Through calmness, you dissolve the noise that once clouded his perception. You remove the emotional intensity that allowed him to escape accountability. You create clarity, not just for yourself but for him. And in this clarity, he sees himself reflected in the stillness you hold. There is a quiet truth that rarely needs to be spoken aloud. Where your energy flows, attention follows, and where your energy retreats, attention suddenly awakens. This principle holds power in relationships, especially when you find yourself giving more than you receive. Energy is not just physical presence. It is emotion, focus, mental space, imagination, anxiety, desire, and the constant internal conversation you carry about someone. When you pour this energy into a person, they feel it, even if they never acknowledge it. But the moment you withdraw that energy, something shifts. The balance recalibrates, and suddenly your absence becomes louder than your presence ever was. Energy withdrawal is not punishment. It is not manipulation. It is the natural response that comes when giving has become one-sided and when your emotional efforts have gone unnoticed. When you pull your energy back, you are not closing your heart. You are simply returning your awareness to where it belongs within yourself. This act of inward redirection creates a ripple effect. It creates space, silence, and an energetic void that he cannot ignore. When your energy is constantly directed toward him, thinking about him, worrying about him, anticipating his messages, reacting to his behavior, it creates an invisible pressure. He becomes accustomed to the emotional current flowing toward him. He begins to expect it, depend on it, or overlook it completely. This is not because he is unkind. It is simply human nature to grow comfortable with what is consistently offered. The steady flow of your energy becomes the background hum of the connection, unnoticed until it is gone. But when you withdraw that energy, the stability he once took for granted disappears. Suddenly, he feels the stillness where your thoughts and emotions used to reach toward him. He notices the silence where your enthusiasm once filled the space. He senses the shift not through your words, but through your absence of attention. It is in this withdrawal that he becomes aware of the magnitude of what you were giving. Energy withdrawal creates contrast. It shows him what life feels like without your constant presence in his emotional landscape. It makes him confront the gaps he once ignored. He realizes that the connection he assumed would always remain is no longer attached to his pace, his moods, or his decisions. This contrast is often the catalyst that awakens his awareness. Many women believe that giving more will create closeness, but in reality, giving more often creates dependency. Not appreciation. It makes him comfortable but not committed. When you withdraw energy, you break this pattern. You remind both him and yourself that connection requires mutual effort. Your energy is valuable, and when you stop offering it freely, he instinctively begins to evaluate his own lack of contribution. Energy withdrawal also returns your attention to your inner world. The moment you stop feeding the connection with your emotional effort, you begin feeding yourself instead. Your mind becomes clearer. Your emotions become steadier. You start noticing your own needs, desires, and boundaries again. This internal recentering is powerful. It shifts your vibration from seeking to receiving, from waiting to choosing, from reacting to observing. And a man feels this shift even if nothing is said. Your energy withdrawal is not coldness. It is neutrality. It is the refusal to force, chase, or convince. It removes the emotional pressure from the situation. Without pressure, he can finally see the reality of his own behavior. Without your emotional effort pushing things forward, he must decide whether he cares enough to step into the space you once filled. This is how attention begins to return. Naturally, not through demand. When you pull energy back, he feels the freedom to choose. And paradoxically, it is that freedom that makes him move toward you. When you stop trying to connect, he begins to notice the disconnection. When you stop seeking reassurance, he begins to question his distance. When your world no longer revolves around him, he starts wondering where your focus has gone. Energy withdrawal exposes truth: who steps forward when you step back, and who disappears when you stop holding the connection together. Some men will notice immediately. They will move closer, sensing that something valuable is slipping from their reach. Others will take time. But the awakening happens because energy is felt before behavior is understood. There is also a deeper effect happening inside him. Your energy once acted as a soft cushion, protecting him from feeling the consequences of his own passivity. But when you withdraw, that cushion disappears. Suddenly, the emotional gap between you becomes real. He must confront the discomfort of his own inaction. This discomfort becomes a motivator. It nudges him to participate actively, to communicate, to offer effort, to match what you once gave. Your withdrawal creates space, not emptiness, but clarity. It removes the emotional noise and leaves only truth. And this truth allows both of you to see the connection for what it is, rather than what constant emotional giving tried to make it appear. In the stillness of your withdrawn energy, he sees your worth more clearly. He feels your absence more deeply. He recognizes your value not through intensity, but through contrast. And through this contrast, attention is regained, effort is renewed, and the dynamic begins to shift not because you demanded it, but because your energy made the change unavoidable. Silence is often misunderstood. People think silence means disinterest, disapproval, or emotional withdrawal. But in reality, silence is a form of recalibration. It is a reset button for dynamics that have become unbalanced, noisy, or emotionally distorted. When you use silence intentionally, not as punishment, but as grounding, you shift the entire structure of the relationship. Silence gives space for reflection, for truth to rise, and for the emotional patterns between two people to reorganize themselves. In many connections, the dynamic becomes dominated by reaction. You speak quickly to explain yourself. You respond instantly to avoid misunderstanding. You fill every gap with conversation, reassurance, or attempts to repair. Over time, this continuous flow of communication makes the other person comfortable. He begins to rely on your words to maintain the connection for him. He expects you to be the one who bridges every distance, who softens every moment of tension, who keeps things moving forward no matter how uneven the effort has become. Silence interrupts this pattern. When you stop speaking, when you stop explaining, when you stop chasing clarity through words, he suddenly feels the weight of the space you once filled. The absence of your voice becomes louder than anything you could have said. Silence removes the noise that allowed him to ignore his own behavior. It removes the emotional cushioning that once protected him from taking responsibility. Without your words smoothing every rough edge, he must confront the roughness within himself. Silence exposes what talking tries to cover. When you step back, the energy shifts. He notices the imbalance that had been hidden under constant communication. He sees the truth of his own participation, or lack of it. Silence forces him to think, to reflect, to question. It reveals the consequences of neglect or inconsistency. It shows him what happens when he stops contributing, because now your silence mirrors his actions back to him. This is why silence resets dynamics. It interrupts the momentum of old patterns and creates room for new ones to take shape. If you always respond immediately, silence teaches patience. If you always initiate, silence creates opportunity for him to step forward. If you always repair emotional tension, silence makes him confront the discomfort he used to avoid. If you always explain your feelings, silence forces him to observe your behavior rather than rely on your words. Silence brings clarity. Words can create confusion, especially in moments of heightened emotion. They can escalate misunderstandings or fuel assumptions. Silence, on the other hand, clears the internal space. It allows you to understand what you feel rather than react instinctively. It gives your nervous system time to settle, your mind time to think, and your spirit time to realign. This inner clarity becomes the foundation for the dynamic you want to create. Silence also removes emotional pressure. When there is no argument to respond to, no message to decode, no emotion to deflect, he is left alone with his own thoughts. That solitude becomes a mirror. Men often understand their feelings through contrast, through the presence and absence of energy. Your silence becomes that contrast. It highlights what your voice usually offers: warmth, stability, validation, effort. When that offering pauses, he begins to understand its value. In this reset, you are not withdrawing affection, you are withdrawing noise. You are choosing to let the dynamic breathe. Silence teaches him that connection is not something you will hold together alone. It shows that you are willing to step back when balance disappears. It communicates boundaries without confrontation. It lets him feel the discomfort of uncertainty, a discomfort he may have been shielding himself from by relying on your constant communication. But silence does more than make him aware. It also transforms you. It strengthens your emotional discipline. It teaches you not to speak from impulse or insecurity. It helps you break the habit of over-explaining or over-giving. Silence creates space for self-respect to rise. You begin to see that not every emotion needs a response, not every moment needs a conversation, and not every imbalance needs to be fixed by you. When you choose silence, you choose peace over urgency. You choose observation over reaction. You choose alignment over attachment. And this inner shift changes how you show up. You become more grounded, less dependent on his attention, more connected to your own inner rhythm. These changes alter the dynamic naturally. He senses the difference. He feels the shift in your energy. Silence makes your presence stronger because it removes all the unnecessary noise around it. Silence also reveals truth. If someone is genuinely invested, silence will draw them closer. They will reach out, initiate, repair, and reconnect. Silence creates an opportunity for effort to emerge. And if effort does not emerge, silence reveals that truth as well. Not through drama, but through the simplicity of inaction. Either way, silence clarifies the path forward. In relationships and connections, dynamics can only reset when something changes. Silence is that change. It is the pause that allows new patterns to form. It is the quiet that invites introspection. It is the space that creates awareness. It is the stillness that makes him reconsider, reevaluate, and realign. And it is the gentle but powerful reminder that your peace is not negotiable and your presence is not to be taken for granted. Detachment is often misunderstood. People hear the word and imagine emotional walls, indifference, or a complete withdrawal of care. But true detachment is none of these things. Detachment is not coldness. It is not distance born from bitterness or revenge. It is a form of self-respect, a conscious choice to protect your inner world from becoming tangled in someone else's uncertainty, inconsistency, or emotional instability. Detachment is the quiet knowing that your peace matters just as much as your love, and that giving without boundaries is not a sign of devotion, but a sign of losing yourself. To detach means to ground yourself in your own center again. It means returning your energy to your own life, your own growth, your own path. It means refusing to hand over the keys of your emotional state to someone who has not earned that responsibility. This is not cold, it is clarity. It is the recognition that love without self-respect does not create closeness, it creates dependency. And dependency blinds you to truth. When you practice detachment, you are not withdrawing affection. You are withdrawing the fear that makes you cling. You are withdrawing the impulse to chase validation. You are withdrawing the habit of overgiving to prove your worth. You are withdrawing the emotional noise that comes from needing someone else's behavior to feel whole. In the place of that noise, you choose stillness. You choose presence. You choose awareness. Detachment allows you to love without losing yourself. It lets you care without collapsing into someone else's emotional landscape. It gives you the ability to observe someone's behavior without taking it personally. It teaches you to respond from your values rather than react from your wounds. This is not coldness. This is maturity. It is emotional strength wrapped in gentleness. When you detach, you stop confusing intensity with intimacy. You stop believing that sacrificing your peace is proof of devotion. You stop thinking that holding on tightly will make someone stay. Attachment born from fear can never create harmony. It only creates pressure, and pressure pushes people away. Detachment removes that pressure, not by withholding love, but by releasing the desperation that tries to control it. Self-respect is at the core of detachment. It means you know your worth regardless of how someone treats you. It means you do not need constant reassurance to feel secure. It means you trust your ability to walk away from situations that threaten your balance. Self-respect tells you that peace is priceless, and anyone who disturbs it without care does not deserve unfiltered access to your heart. Detachment also creates clarity. When you are attached, your perception becomes clouded by hope, fear, and projection. You see what you want to see, or what you are afraid to see, rather than what is real. But when you detach, you step back from the emotional fog. You begin to observe the situation as it is. You see patterns instead of excuses, actions instead of words, behavior instead of potential. This clarity empowers you to decide what truly aligns with your life rather than forcing something that does not fit. Many people mistake detachment for shutting down, but shutting down comes from exhaustion, pain, or withdrawal after being hurt. Detachment comes from awareness. It is a conscious choice, not a reaction. It is a softening, not a hardening. It is the way you maintain your heart without sacrificing your boundaries. Detachment creates emotional space, not distance. It allows connection to flow more naturally without being suffocated by expectation. In relationships, detachment is what allows balance to return. When you stop overextending yourself, the other person must step forward if the connection is real. When you stop carrying the emotional labor of the relationship alone, both people must contribute. Detachment invites reciprocity. It makes room for the other person to show their intentions, their effort, their consistency. When you step back respectfully, you give them the chance to step forward willingly. Detachment also changes how you react to disappointment. Instead of being shattered by someone's inconsistency, you simply take note. Instead of trying to fix what is broken, you allow things to reveal themselves. Instead of forcing connection, you choose alignment. You stop trying to make someone care. You stop explaining why you deserve better. You stop begging for what should come naturally. Detachment gives you the inner strength to let people show you who they are without interference. Your emotional world becomes less chaotic. You become less triggered, less anxious, less reactive. You stop monitoring every message, every gesture, every small shift in energy. Instead, you rest within yourself. Your worth is no longer tied to someone else's attention. You begin to feel calm, centered, grounded. And ironically, this calmness often inspires others to treat you with more respect, not less. Detachment is not the absence of emotion. It is the mastery of emotion. It is the ability to feel deeply without losing your grounding. It is recognizing that love is meaningful, but peace is essential. And when you choose both love and peace, your relationships transform. Not because you force them to, but because your self-respect creates a higher standard for everything you allow into your life. There comes a moment in every connection when you realize that choosing someone else at the expense of yourself creates an invisible imbalance. You give more, you sacrifice more, you adjust more, and slowly, without noticing it, you begin to shrink. Your world becomes centered around his needs, his moods, his timing, his attention. But the moment you choose yourself again, truly choose yourself, everything shifts. Not only does your inner landscape transform, but he is forced to reevaluate the way he sees you, the way he treats you, and the way he shows up for the connection. Choosing yourself is not an act of selfishness. It is an act of alignment. It is the recognition that you cannot continue pouring into someone who does not pour back. It is the understanding that your worth is not defined by how much you endure, how much you give, or how tightly you hold on. When you choose yourself, you return to your center. You pull your energy back. You stop abandoning your own needs to satisfy someone else's comfort. This shift is powerful because it interrupts the pattern he has grown accustomed to. Men often respond not to words, but to energy. As long as your world revolves around him, he has no reason to change the dynamic. He becomes comfortable, perhaps even complacent. He assumes your effort will continue, your patience will stretch, your availability will remain open. But when you choose yourself, you break the unspoken agreement that you will always be the emotional carrier of the connection. Suddenly, the dynamic no longer functions the way it used to. The comfort he relied on dissolves. The certainty he took for granted weakens. And this forces reevaluation. Your shift does not need to be dramatic. You do not need to make announcements, ultimatums, or emotional declarations. The change happens quietly. You begin respecting your boundaries. You start saying no where you once said yes. You stop explaining yourself. You stop making excuses for his lack of effort. You redirect your attention toward your goals, your peace, your growth. You invest in your hobbies, your routines, your aspirations. This quiet redirection of energy becomes loud in his internal world. He feels the difference before he understands it. Your energy becomes less available. You become less predictable. You are no longer operating from fear of losing him. You are no longer seeking his validation to feel secure. This shift creates a new emotional landscape, one where he must decide how much he values your presence, because you are no longer giving it without question. Choosing yourself forces him to confront his own behavior. He begins to see where he has been passive, inconsistent, or careless. Your absence highlights what your presence once concealed. When you stop overcompensating, he must look at the gaps he created. When you stop initiating, he must face the silence. When you stop tolerating things that hurt you, he must face the truth of how he has contributed to the imbalance. This revaluation can be uncomfortable for him because it dismantles the illusion that he was doing enough. It shines a light on the places where he fell short. But it also opens the door for growth. If he cares, this moment becomes a catalyst. He begins to show more effort. He becomes more intentional. He pays attention. He listens. He steps forward not because you demanded it, but because your self-respect raises the standard of the connection. Choosing yourself does not push him away. It pushes you closer to clarity. And clarity is what reveals whether he is capable of meeting you where you stand. If he values you, your shift will awaken a deeper effort. If he was only benefiting from what you gave, your shift will expose that truth as well. Either way, the reevaluation happens. The power of choosing yourself is that it changes what you accept. You no longer tolerate crumbs. You no longer settle for minimal effort. You no longer sacrifice your peace for temporary affection. You make decisions from self-worth instead of loneliness, fear, or hope. You begin to prioritize your emotional well-being above someone else's comfort. This new foundation forces him to see you differently. He can no longer treat you casually. He can no longer take your patience for granted. He can no longer rely on the old versions of you, the ones who bent, stretched, or waited. When you choose yourself, your presence becomes a privilege, not a guarantee. He begins to understand that connection with you requires consistency, respect, and reciprocity. He feels the weight of your new boundaries and the clarity of your new standards. This is where transformation begins, not from external pressure, but from the internal shift you created by realigning with your worth. Choosing yourself also strengthens your inner world. You gain confidence, emotional stability, and a deeper sense of identity. You stop looking outward for validation because you have found it within. This inner shift influences every interaction you have with him. Your communication becomes clearer. Your energy becomes calmer. Your expectations become healthier, and he must rise to meet this new version of you. When you choose yourself, he must reevaluate you because he is now interacting with a woman who knows her value, who honors her own boundaries, who moves from self-trust rather than fear. This reevaluation is not a sign of distance. It is a sign of awakening. Your self-respect becomes the mirror through which he must see the truth of how he has treated you and how he must treat you moving forward.